So what is the perfect gravel tire pressure? The answer is there definitely isn't one, there's lots of them. And that's mainly because on a gravel bike you'll be riding a whole host of variable terrains in variable conditions with a whole host of other variabilities in there as well. So today we're going to try and give you the best starting point for you, your riding style and your bike setup. So without further ado, let's cut to the chase and give you the graph that you've all been waiting for. So here it is, this is the graph that we've manifested to give you an ideal tyre pressure starting point. So the left vertical axis is the tyre pressure in PSI, and the bottom vertical axis shows the rider weight in kilograms. And above that you've got a key that shows different tyre width options, as these dramatically change the pressures that you'll have in your tyres, so match them up to the ones that you've got on your bike. And although this graph's going to give you a good starting point, by no means is that going to be your final tyre pressure, and we're going to go over everything that changes that now. So firstly, I've got to say that every single tyre will have its minimum and maximum tyre pressure that it's been designed to be safely used at. Every tyre has these values printed on the side of them. So if you look on the side of this WTB Venture, you can see it's got a 30 to 60 PSI pressure range. So if you don't go below or above that, your tyre should always stay safely on your rim. So the graph relates to being tubeless, and it's not just because I love it. I think most other gravel riders have adopted riding tubeless systems too, because there's loads of nice benefits to it, which we'll talk about in a minute. But if you still are riding any tubes, which I guess is okay, I'll probably add about 5 PSI to the graph you saw earlier, just to minimise on the chance of getting a pinch flat. So just to quickly cover some of the benefits of running a tubeless system, it usually, most of the time, seals most medium to small size punctures without you even realising, which is a really nice touch. It gives you a few more pressure options as you can run them a little bit lower. And what's nice about these lower tyre pressures is the fact you can get more grip, more comfort, and essentially more confidence when you're riding. And it's basically giving your rigid gravel bike a bit of suspension. Running these lower tyre pressures doesn't come without its own set of drawbacks, as you don't get anything for free when changing your PSI in your gravel tyres. And it's all a balancing act to get it just right for you and the conditions that you're riding in. So riding a lower pressure means you get increased rolling resistance, which is the grip that you have, but that means you'll be using more energy to ride the same distance, and every pedal stroke will just feel that little bit harder. And if you run them too low, your tyres can start squirming when going around corners, which doesn't feel great and fill you with confidence either. And you run the risk of the tyre completely deforming when you hit a harsh object like a rock, for example, which can lead to a bit of rim damage, which no one wants. So if you know you're going to be riding a fairly rough trail, you can take out a few PSI to give you a little bit more comfort and a little bit more grip. But essentially, if you know it's going to be really rough, I actually wouldn't take much out at all, as you don't want to run the risk of bottoming out. Although this isn't a tyre choice video, if you're going to be riding rougher terrain, the bigger volume tyre, for example a tyre like this, is going to give you more suspension, and it's going to be much more suitable for that sort of rougher terrain. As if you're going to be riding a tyre like this with less volume in it, that basically gives you less offering for suspension without the chance of bottoming out on the rim. On the flip side to this, if you're going to be riding harder and smoother surfaces like roads and byways, for example, then a tyre like this is probably going to be a better choice, as it's going to have less rolling resistance. And we recommend putting a 5 or maybe even up to 10 extra PSI on your tyres, depending on how smooth it is, as you won't need that added comfort and grip quite so much, and you'll really benefit from the lack of rolling resistance. So just to demonstrate how the same tyre performs under different pressures, I'm going to ride over the same object at the same angle with the same speed, with the only difference being the PSI in the tyres. So I'm using 45mm tyres, and in this first run I'm going over the object at a high 40 PSI. And then in the second run here I'm going over it with a much lesser 25 PSI, and you can really see how the tyre deforms over the object and how differently the tyre performs as a whole. So this really does show the extent of how the same tyre can perform really differently in the exact same scenario, and how getting the right tyre pressure can really alter how the ride feels. If you're planning a ride in the wet and you know the trail ahead is full of roots and slippery rock surfaces, then it's going to be really beneficial to just take a few PSI, maybe up to 5 PSI out of your tyres, because it's going to give you that really enhanced grip when riding on those dodgy surfaces, and it's just going to give you that enhanced confidence. So you can drop a few PSI if you're going to be riding in the wet too. Whether you're using 650B or 700C wheels, as long as you're using the same width tyre, there isn't a great difference of air volume actually in the tyre itself. So the numbers in the graph are still going to represent a good starting point for both wheel sizes. Most riders tend to want to have more grip at the front of the bike, as this is what gives them more confidence when cornering. And as usually, less weight is actually put on the front tyre, as most of your weight usually sits on the back of your bike. So you can usually get away with taking a little bit of air out the front tyre to give you a little bit more confidence too. Speaking of luggage, if you're going on a bike packing adventure, you can have a lot of it, and it can really affect the way the bike rides. So depending on how much you're carrying, you might need to add an extra 5 PSI to counter this. And lastly, different tyres themselves have really different characteristics. And some of them come in almost bulletproof with really thick rubber sidewalls with all sorts of stuff in them like Kevlar to protect the tyre from punctures as much as possible. These tyres are not only usually heavier, but they're usually less compliant than other tyres too. And that really affects the way they ride. So you might find if you've got a really heavy tyre, you can run a few PSI less. And if you've got a really malleable tyre that doesn't have much protection, then you might want to add a few more PSI in there to counteract that as well. So with all that done, you should have a really good starting point for you and the trails that you'll be riding. Let us know what tyres, pressures, systems you're all using in the comments, as I'd love to know what you're all using out there. I hope this was useful. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.